Ole Miss must make tweaks if they want to maximize a talent like Austin Simmons for 2025.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. On today's show, we're looking ahead to 2025 and breaking down what Ole Miss must do to avoid some of the mistakes that were made in 2024. This upcoming team will be all about potential, not the lofty expectations tied to one of the best rosters in college football in 2024. Even with the exciting upside of Austin Simmons at quarterback, there's still a few tweaks that this fan base is eager to see. As always, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who keep this show thriving. You made us the Ole Miss Morning Show, and we appreciate that. Don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They provide fresh perspectives on the SEC, college football, and heck, even Ole Miss as well. So check them out. Let's dive right in. But first, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guarantee win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So it should be pretty interesting with what's going on in college football. This football season has a chance to be probably the most fun football season that Ole Miss fans have gone through since 2021, as far as not having the expectations, because some people fear expectations for better or worse. Whenever they think you're supposed to be good, they just can't handle the disappointment of not hitting those goals. So they have more fun when there's less expectations. That's just the way this works from time to time. And this Ole Miss football team has a chance to be the most fun since 2021. And that is because of the unknowns that are attached to this roster with a ton of potential. We'll talk about some tweaks to the offense in the second segment, and we'll talk about a little bit more. But first, the question is going to be in 2025, will Ole Miss make the necessary tweaks to maximize Austin Simmons? Because he has an excellent upside if he is used correctly. And this number two thing is the offense in a position to change a little bit based off of who is getting recruited? We're going to let you know about that as well. And will Ole Miss do a better job of the offseason in 2025? I do think that there are problems that happened during the Kentucky game, and ultimately what kept Ole Miss out of the playoffs were problems that came in April, in May, in June, that time frame. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. My take this season is it has a chance to be the most fun Ole Miss football season since 2021. And Austin Simmons is a huge part of that. He is the most anticipated quarterback that Ole Miss has had since Eli Manning, if you want to look within the fan base and everybody been excited with him taking over. He is also the most talented quarterback since Eli Manning to take over at Ole Miss. He is an unbelievably high upside quarterback, but he's not necessarily an RPO guy. He can run. He's a 4-5 guy. He's somebody that has the athletic ability to be very good, but he is more comfortable throwing the football. He is more of a surgical quarterback that is willing to try and take you apart. Listen, his stats this year, he's only 19 of 32, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. That's not an overly high amount of yards, touchdowns, completions, and attempts. But those are pretty good numbers considering the biggest drive that he had came against the Georgia Bulldogs, where he took the Ole Miss Rebels straight down the field. Listen, Austin Simmons is the most upside quarterback that Ole Miss has had in 20 years, period. And before then, probably since Archie Manning. This is an extremely high upside quarterback that does things a little bit different. Like he can do RPO. He can do all of that stuff, but that's not necessarily his game so far. His game, from what I have denoted basically from his performance, is going out there diagnosing the defense early and getting the ball out of his hands to his playmakers, specifically to Caden Lee, down the field and over. That is what he does really well. He does the cerebral stuff that you need in a quarterback at an extremely high level. This is a guy that graduated high school like 2 years early and came to Ole Miss. This is one of the smartest quarterbacks that Ole Miss has had. This is probably the most, football smart quarterback that Ole Miss has had since Eli Manning. His upside is completely out of this world. But the difference is, while he can do it, I don't know if you would maximize what Austin Simmons can do if you asked him to do the same stuff that Jackson Dart was so proficient in 2024, 2023, and beyond. Ole Miss was heavy RPO in 2023 and 2024 because that was a system and a game that Jackson Dart was performing at very, very well. He was making all of the passes, doing what he can do, and he was such a dual threat, almost a linebacker type mentality of a quarterback, that he was able to use that, even if maybe the offensive line wasn't doing everything it needed to do. Jackson Dart made that offense run, and he walked away from Ole Miss holding nearly every record there is. It is going to be important for Austin Simmons not to try to be Jackson Dart. Two different type quarterbacks. And that's probably not the way to maximize Austin's ability. Lane Kiffin has to tweak the offense and find a way to make this thing really purr. And I think he's done that. The next segment, we're going to talk about potential tweaks to the offensive system to where Ole Miss can be really effective in the run game and the pass game and operate at tempo. They may have something kind of cooking on the side there as well. Listen, the camaraderie and connection that he and Caden Lee have, it's already in a good spot. Caden Lee's going to have a monster year in 2025. He just is. The connection that was developed between he and Austin Simmons, it's real. Daquan Wright is going to be a real weapon this season. After that, things kind of start to look like it could be a little bit different. Not bad, not good, just different. And it will take Austin Simmons with his quick reads and knowing exactly what the defense is doing and how to react to it before the ball's even snapped. It's going to make it to where he can attack quickly when he has to do it. And with weapons that they have on the outside, hey, Winnie Watkins at the Under Armour or the Navy All-American game in San Antonio, showing off right now. Shakai Mills-Knight looks fantastic. So we'll see exactly what they look like. That game, by the way, is at, I think, noon Eastern on NBC Saturday. So anybody who wants to check that out, you can check that out, especially with two Ole Miss weapons that are potentially playing in that game. But Ole Miss, it looks like, is trying to get bigger at the tight end position, at the wide receiver position. They're trying to set it up to where their offense is bigger, stronger, faster than the other team. And it makes sense. And we're going to talk about in the third segment that Ole Miss needs to start acting more like the favorite instead of like the plucky underdog that's kind of in the Ole Miss DNA. And sometimes that got Ole Miss in trouble. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But Austin Simmons, and using him correctly, more of a surgical drop back quarterback, more of a designed run play offense to where it's a little bit more creative, looking a little bit more like the Gator Bowl did, would be good for an Austin Simmons, because this is a guy that has all of the tools and all of the talent that an Ole Miss quarterback would need to have, probably the best since Eli Manning. And it's going to be important to maximize that ability. And the way you can do that is by setting him up for success. And we'll talk about exactly how you can set him up for success by saying, could Ole Miss be hinting at a big offensive shift with more tight end bodies coming in through the transfer portal? And Austin Simmons at quarterback is 12 or 13 personnel, even at tempo. The future in Oxford, Mississippi will break down exactly what it means for the Rebels. Stay tuned. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That has definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for. That's kind of what the subscription services want. The Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel those unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has saved over 5 million users, a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, and saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore. I've already saved a ton. With their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more so stressing about budgeting every single month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. So go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. So, looking at this, we talked about Austin Simmons and what he brings to the table. And during the transfer portal window this year, you've noticed the wide receiver room and the personnel, the way it's built up, it's kind of starting to look a little bit different. And Ole Miss is focusing on one particular position that has a chance to be 4 or 5 deep in that room when the season starts, which kind of lets you think that 12 personnel might be an option for the Rebels this season. Let's start with Daquan Wright. Tight end for the Gator Bowl this year, had kind of a star turn. He was absolutely fantastic. 27 catches, 394 yards on the year, and 4 touchdowns. In the Gator Bowl, like I said, he looked great. He looked like an absolute weapon, and he's somebody that's going to be a force to reckon with this year. So let's move to the transfer portal this year, not even counting like Dylan Hip and those guys and the freshman signee that they brought in this year. These are just the transfer portal type players that Ole Miss have brought in this season. Starting with Luke Haas, 26 catches, 324 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He is an extremely athletic guy out of Oklahoma. Arkansas, I talked with John Neighbors yesterday. Arkansas hates to see this guy go. Luke Haas is a ball winner. And if you want to look at it, Daquan Wright is 255 pounds at 6'4". Luke Haas is 241 pounds at 6'3". He's not the only tight end. You would think that the tight end position, Ole Miss would kind of shut that down. But when you look at it, they have a guy on campus as we speak right now named Trace Bruckler. He's a tight end out of New Mexico. 22 catches, 138 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 245-pound tight end as well. You can see a lot of size. You can see a lot of somebody that can help you out in the pass game and somebody that can allow you to run 12 or 13 even personnel at tempo and not really make you have to change your offense. You can have 12 personnel lined up, and since you can stretch out wide receivers and split them out, which Ole Miss is pretty much known to do it. They've been running 11 personnel, like 10 personnel for a while now. This could allow you to have a 12 personnel and split them out on both sides, and everything would be fine. Luke Haas and Daquan Wright would make the wide receiver unit click. It would protect somebody like Caden Lee. It would protect somebody like Winnie Watkins if you have a smaller wide receiver in the game. But it's not just those tight ends as far as bringing in some size in the Ole Miss room. And let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. You have Caleb Odom, who transferred over from Alabama, and I talked about the guy that can unlock this Ole Miss offense, and I've mentioned this for 3 weeks. It was Caleb Odom. Last year, as a true freshman year, he had 7 catches, 65 yards. He is a 230-pound wide receiver. He is going to play wide receiver at Ole Miss, but he's 230 pounds at 6'5". unbelievably athletic guy, super hands, excellent wide receiver, a true 5-star that was recruited. People get rated 5-star all the time, probably pretty good players. Caleb Odom deserved to be a 5-star. It's a situation where Ole Miss thought they had him as a high school player, but Nick Saban was able to recruit him in at the last second, really convinced what's going on with his Alabama position coach at that point, Joe Cox, to bring him in. And then Nick Saban, after the season, ended up retiring. Joe Cox ended up coming to Ole Miss. Caleb Odom followed right behind him. You can have Caleb Odom at a wide receiver position, Luke Haas and Daquan Wright at tight end, and run tempo and run your normal offense. That is where this gets kind of fun. You can have 3 tight ends on the field that's going to be a mismatch against linebackers and against defensive backs as far as the quick passing game, and you can run your total normal offense. And also your running game is going to be really good because you can see the size that you're putting on the field. Even whenever you bring in smaller players like Winnie Watkins or you have Caden Lee, that's only one position on the field if you do this big look to everybody else. And he's not the only one. This guy, Deshaun Stribling from Oklahoma State, 52 catches, 882 yards, and 6 touchdowns, despite playing for an Oklahoma State team that was unbelievably bad throwing the football this year. Nearly 1,000-yard season when Oklahoma State could not throw the ball. Alan Bowman was not that dude for Oklahoma State this year. He just wasn't. But Deshaun Stribling, by the way, his height, about 200 pounds, 6'2", 200 pounds. If you want to look at Trey Harris, he was 6'3", 210. So it's right in that same ballpark of what Trey, the physical wide receiver on Ole Miss's team, is. Deshaun Stribling has a chance to be the small wide receiver on the field if Caleb Odom plays and Ole Miss goes into a big set. Like I said, you can run tempo on this. Your running game is going to be better because of how this offensive personnel grouping is built. It looks like it's going to be pretty fantastic for what can happen. Anybody that's watched this show for any period of time knows how much I care about 12 personnel and how much I've talked about 12 personnel over the last 2 years. Well, this year, because of the injury to Trey Harris, Ole Miss used a good bit of 12 personnel with Caden Prieskorn and Daquan Wright. Daquan Wright became the weapon that everybody hoped he would be. Caden Prieskorn kind of took a step back, but he did his job even as an inline type tight end. This Ole Miss offensive unit with Caleb Odom, with Daquan Wright, with Luke Haas, potentially on the field at the same time, with a Deshaun Stribling, your running back, they're going to be unbelievably happy with everything, whether it's Logan Diggs or Shakai Mills-Knight or Kewan Lacey. You're going to be in a position to where they can be an extremely effective team running the football. And those tweaks of 12 personnel, is the RPO system just going to be diminished a little bit at Ole Miss to where you're running more true run schemes whenever you're trying to play the on-schedule game? Now, Lane Kiffin is always going to have a good offense. He's the only team in the league that averaged over 500 yards per game this season. Ole Miss is always going to be at the very tippy top of the SEC in offense. But that doesn't mean things don't need to change. There's a way that you can make everything a little bit better, and it looks like Ole Miss is heading down that road with bigger players being recruited, obviously to play, because you don't recruit transfer players to sit around. Well, at least I think you don't. But Luke Haas and Daquan Wright and potentially Trace Bruckler at tight end, that gives you the opportunity to do that. Remember, Dylan Hips over there as well. The kid out of Buford, Georgia that Ole Miss signed in this recruiting class is in that room as well. Ole Miss probably has 6 tight ends that are pretty high level as we speak right now. They're tailor-made to run 12 personnel and run quite a bit of it, if we're going to be perfectly honest about it. Deshaun Stribling, Caleb Odom, Caden Lee, and the incoming freshman class, which there's no pressure on these freshmen, even Caleb Cunningham, to get on the field from the very beginning. I do think that Cunningham will, and they will go route him the same way that they tried to do Aiden Williams. So it's going to be up to Caleb Williams to make plays and handle what's going on. So we'll see exactly how that looks for Ole Miss as well. Anyway, in our final segment, we're breaking down the mistakes that I think Ole Miss made in 2024 and what Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss Rebels can do to avoid them moving forward. Don't miss a crucial look ahead. All right, we are back, and we're going to talk about the offseason. The offseason is going to be very important for Ole Miss. What will Ole Miss do to maximize the offseason in 2025? Last season was almost a textbook event of almost operating out of fear of the transfer portal window that was right after spring practice, which meant spring practice was kind of a joke for Ole Miss in 2024. Just was. And because of everything that started in spring practice, you look up and Ole Miss is in a position to where they didn't know exactly what their roster was. You saw the Kentucky game. That was an Ole Miss team that was not sure of exactly what they had. They were cocky. They were arrogant because they beat up on ACC teams throwing the bomb. But once a talent equal, so to speak, stepped on the field, you had problematic. The offensive line didn't quite look right. The defensive line, it was up to them to keep everything going on, but there were some problems offensively that Ole Miss had to figure out, even running back and all of this stuff, the personnel issues that happened on the offensive side of the ball. I think that's because they didn't necessarily know what they had on each side of the ball. Coaches are notoriously slow decision makers. They need hours upon hours upon hours of film before they can make a decision on anything. In their ideal world, it's probably a 97% hit rate before they make the decision on whether or not a player is going to start, because you have to be able to trust that player. You have to be able to 100% understand what that player is going to do. And if they don't do that, it might be problematic. And we saw players like Ulysses Bentley, Aiden Williams, guys that maybe the coaching staff didn't like or didn't trust or whatever the reason they didn't play. I think a more grounded in football spring would have helped Ole Miss out. I get that Ole Miss is trying to do the NFL OTA thing. I get that. I get whatever's going on. But the problem that is happening right now is there's not really a checklist, so to speak, to make decisions any quicker at a higher rate that is successful. So Ole Miss had some trouble on the offensive line. If you remember, during fall camp, you're 2 weeks away from the opener, and they were still saying, yeah, we're still trying to figure out what we have on the offensive line. Them saying that, there were some questions that probably should have been answered going into the season, and that happened that way. The other thing is the reliance on analytics. And this is just my theory. I have the saying that you hear on every show that analytics is the old English word for bad football. And I do think that analytics is basically used as a shield to avoid accountability for making bad decisions and all of that. I know that certain people believe in analytics. I just don't. I think it makes a much more messy product and a much more excuse-filled product whenever they get blamed for absolutely everything. But when you look at analytics, I genuinely believe that if Matt Luke was just 100% calling the Ole Miss game in 2024 to where everything is completely by the numbers and exactly how it's supposed to be, Ole Miss is probably in the playoffs. They just are. I think analytics kept Ole Miss out of the college football playoff in 2024. I'll always think that. I will always believe that. And because of that, I'm going to set my opinion moving on about analytics. We'll see how it goes. Will Ole Miss play a game like a favorite in 2025? See, in 2024, Ole Miss has the plucky underdog, almost ethos mentality. Ole Miss loved the analytics of Lane Kiffin and going for it because you were the plucky underdog. And once you got to the point where you belonged, you didn't have to do those things. That just added more risk. When you're in the swamp, playing on the road in a difficult place to play, and you have a chance to take a lead, you take it. You do not get greedy and go for it on fourth down. That happened on all three of the losses. Going forward inside the 20-yard line on fourth down, when a field goal would likely win you the game. It's the way it works. There's an epidemic in college football right now of coaches not taking points. And it's costing them over and over again, and their excuse is analytics. So Ole Miss needs to figure out a way to rely less on analytics and play more by the numbers. Because with a defense like Ole Miss had a year ago, scoring 17, 20 points in a game, odds are you were going to win that game because of how good the defensive unit was. This year is going to be a little bit different, but I think that with a younger quarterback, you need to play it a little bit closer to the vest in Austin Simmons and try and get that confidence early on in the season. We'll see exactly how it goes. I'm pretty fired up about what Ole Miss can do in 2025. Like I said, this could be the most fun football season that Ole Miss fans have sat through in 5 years because of the unknowns on both sides of the ball. There's potential out the wazoo. There's 5 stars all over the place that can help you out. But it's still potential. You still have to see it. You can look at the potential. You can talk about the potential. They still need to do it. So we'll see exactly what that looks like as well. Ole Miss had a visit from Landon Locke from Rockwall High School. We talked about him yesterday. He was on campus. He posted that on social media. Ben Bell was on campus yesterday. He is, for a career, had 126 tackles, 31 for loss, 2 passes defended, and 19 sacks. I actually had somebody reach out, the same person that reached out about Princely and Monmielen, and just talk about how excited he was and how much he thought of Ben Bell. So that is interesting, and that immediately made my ears perk up on this prospect as well. And we talked about Price Bruckler, the tight end from New Mexico. There's several defensive backs that are going on. There's visits happening all over the place, and I think something's going to start popping at least fairly soon. We'll see exactly how that looks for Ole Miss and everybody going on. Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we are the number 1 Ole Miss podcast and Ole Miss's chosen morning show. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in college football. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, hotty toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word meaning bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.